On a quiet Friday morning in July 2020, a small group of people gathered inside a chapel most of the world had never heard of. There were no crowds pressed against iron gates, no cameras positioned along a processional route, no commemorative mugs being sold outside, no live television coverage, no announcement of any kind. A princess of the British royal family was getting married, and almost nobody knew it was happening. The woman walking toward the altar was wearing a dress that hadn't been seen in public since 1962, a dress that had belonged to her grandmother, a dress that the most famous woman in the world had once worn to a film premiere and had now quietly, privately, offered to her granddaughter for a day that was supposed to be grand and had instead become something else entirely, something smaller, something more fragile, and somehow, against all odds, something more beautiful than anything the original plan could have produced. And the man waiting for her at the end of that aisle, that is where this story really begins. Because Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is not who the tabloids told you he was. He is not simply the charming property developer who got lucky with a princess. He is something far more complicated, far more interesting, and in many ways, far more surprising than any headline has ever managed to capture. This is the truth about Princess Beatrice's husband, and it goes much deeper than you think. Let's start with his name, because even his name tells you something. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi. Say it slowly. Let it sit in your mouth for a moment. It doesn't sound like the name of a modern London businessman. It sounds like the name of someone who should be commissioning frescoes, or signing treaties in candlelit rooms, or riding across a hillside in northern Italy with a falcon on his arm. And here's the thing. That instinct is not entirely wrong, because Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi is, in the most literal and technical sense of the word, a count. His family holds a hereditary title of Count of the Kingdom of Italy, a designation granted in 1913 by King Victor Emmanuel III to all male descendants of the Mapelli Mozzi line. Italy abolished its royal titles in 1946 when the monarchy fell. But a title written into the fabric of a family's identity across centuries doesn't simply disappear because a government votes on it. His ancestry, by some accounts, traces back to the son of King Federico II of Sicily. We are not talking about a family with a colorful history. We are talking about a family that is the history. Generations of nobility stretching back, so far that most modern nations didn't yet exist when the Mapelli Mozzi name was already carrying weight in the world. And the family has not exactly downsized. They still own the Villa Mapelli Mozzi in northern Italy, a 15th century estate that began its life as a monastery and now operates as a luxury retreat. Stone walls that have absorbed 700 years of history. Garden that have watched empires rise and dissolve. A place that makes most people's concept of old money look relatively recent. So while some people marry into royalty, Edoardo walked into that relationship carrying his own version of it, quietly tucked into his background, never announced, never performed. Simply there, woven into the fabric of who he is. But here is where the story pivots, because Edoardo is not a man defined by the past. He is very much a man of the present, educated at the Dragon School in Oxford, then Radley College, then the University of Edinburgh, where he earned a master's degree in politics. By his mid-20s, he had already founded Bonda Property, a high-end development and interior design company serving London's most demanding clientele. He is polished. He is ambitious. He is, by every account, extremely easy on the eyes. And beneath all of that, behind the monogrammed shirts and the pastel blazers and the carefully curated Instagram grid, there's a story involving a broken engagement, a child nobody expected, a wedding that took place in near total secrecy, and a shadow that has followed this family for years and shows no sign of leaving. To understand the man Beatrice chose, you have to go back, all the way back, to a different woman, a different life, and a little boy whose existence changed everything. Before Princess Beatrice, there was Dara Huang. And Dara Huang is not someone you dismiss with a paragraph. She is an American architect, Harvard-educated, internationally successful, and by every measure a woman of extraordinary achievement. For several years, she and Edoardo were, by all appearances, building something real together. They got engaged around 2014. They moved through the same glittering social world. And in 2016, they had a son, His name is Christopher Wolfe Mapelli Mozzi. Everyone calls him Wolfie. And Wolfie, if the photographs tell you anything at all, is quite possibly the most magnetic child to ever orbit the edges of a royal family. Dark-eyed, bright-faced, the kind of kid who looks like he already knows exactly how charming he is. But by 2018, the engagement was over. The details of what fractured between Dara and Edoardo have never been made public. Neither of them has chosen to turn their private grief into tabloid content, which places them several rungs above most of the people adjacent to the story. What the record shows is simply this. They separated. They arranged co-parenting. And they got on with things. What the record also shows is the timeline. Because within months of that engagement ending, Edoardo had begun spending time with someone new. Someone whose last name is Windsor. The press didn't catch on until November 2018. But by then the relationship was already underway. And in the royal gossip ecosystem, where timing is everything and proximity is treated as confession, the closeness of these two events did not go unnoticed. Nobody said anything publicly. Nobody ever does. But the gap between one relationship ending and another beginning was narrow enough to raise questions that have never been formally answered. And in the world of royal watching, an unanswered question has a half-life of decades. What changed everything, though, was not the timing of the romance. It was Wolfie himself. Because Wolfie did not fade into background when the relationship ended. He was present. He was real. He was a 3-year-old boy who needed both his parents to figure out how to exist in each other's orbit without burning everything down. And when Beatrice entered the picture, she entered a situation that was already complicated in ways most people would have found overwhelming. She became a stepmother, a princess of the British royal family, 10th in line to the throne, became the stepmother to a little boy named Wolfie, who had no idea what any of that meant and simply needed someone to show up for him. By every account, she has done exactly that. Reports from within the family circle suggest the co-parenting arrangement between Dara and Edoardo is genuinely functional. Civilized, even, Dara took Wolfie to Florida for Christmas in 2025. Edoardo was in Palm Beach at a design conference the same week. Whatever broke between those two adults, they have kept it from breaking their son. That is not a small thing. That is actually a remarkable thing, and it deserves to be said plainly. But the Wolfie situation was only the first complication. The second one was about to arrive, where in the face of Beatrice's father, the love story itself is not what you expect. This was not two strangers catching each other's eyes across a crowded room. This was not a red carpet coincidence or a holiday romance that took on unexpected weight. This was a friendship that had existed for years. Quietly, without any particular urgency, until one day the conditions were finally right and something shifted. The Mapelli Mozzi family and the Yorks had known each other for years. Both families had confirmed this publicly. When the engagement was announced in 2019, Edoardo's mother, Nikki, released a statement, noting that her family had known Beatrice for most of her life. These were not strangers discovering each other. These were people who had stood at the same parties, attended the same charity events, moved through the same rooms for the better part of 2 decades without it ever tipping into something more. And then, sometime around September 2018, it did. Beatrice had ended her long relationship with Dave Clark in 2016. Edoardo had just closed a chapter with Dara. Both of them were, for the first time in years, unattached. Both of them were circling the same social world. And the collision, when it finally came, must have felt to both of them less like a surprise and more like an inevitability. Their first confirmed public appearance came in March 2019 at a fundraising event at the National Portrait Gallery. Edoardo stood beside a princess, and the tabloids immediately lost their collective composure. Who was this tall, rakishly handsome property developer? Why was he standing next to royalty? And was that, someone whispered, actually a count? 2 months later, they attended the wedding of Lady Gabriella Windsor together, and the question of whether this was serious was answered definitively. By September 2019, they were in Italy, and Edoardo was proposing a ring he had designed himself, working with British jeweler Sean Lean on a custom piece featuring a baguette-cut diamond set in a floral design. On September 26, 2019, Buckingham Palace made it official. The statement from the couple was almost stubbornly ordinary. "We are both so excited to be embarking on this life adventure together," they said, "and can't wait to be married." It was warm. It was simple. It was, by royal engagement announcement standards, refreshingly free of drama. The wedding, however, was going to be anything but. The original plan was everything you would expect. The Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace. May 29, 2020. A formal royal ceremony followed by a reception in the gardens of Buckingham Palace. Commemorative coverage. The full pageantry of marrying into the British monarchy. And then November 2019 arrived. And with it, Andrew. What happened in that BBC studio is, at this point, a matter of public record. Prince Andrew sat down to address the questions surrounding his relationship with convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. And what followed was a masterclass in how not to manage a crisis. The interview was not just bad. It was catastrophic. Sweeping, scorched earth, reputationally catastrophic in a way that sent shockwaves through the entire institution of the monarchy and landed, with particular weight, on the shoulders of his daughters. Beatrice's wedding planning was immediately scaled back. What had been moving toward a grand, public occasion became something quieter, smaller, more careful. And then before any of those adjustments could fully settle, the world itself shut down. COVID-19 arrived in spring 2020 and ended what remained of the original vision. The Chapel Royal ceremony was postponed. The Buckingham Palace reception was abandoned. The entire elaborate architecture of the planned celebration simply collapsed. When Beatrice and Edoardo finally married on July 17, 2020, it was at the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Royal Lodge in Windsor. Immediate family only. No public announcement beforehand. No crowds. No cameras along a processional route. The outside world did not know it was happening until it was already over. And yet, what occurred inside that small, private chapel was more extraordinary than anything the original ceremony could have offered. Because Beatrice walked in wearing a dress that had not been seen in public since 1962. A vintage ivory silk taffeta gown, originally designed by Norman Hartnell, that Queen Elizabeth II had worn to the premiere of Lawrence of Arabia. She also wore the Queen's diamond fringe tiara, the same one Her Majesty had worn on her own wedding day in 1947. A ceremony stripped of almost every royal tradition ended with a bride wearing the two most historically resonant pieces in the entire family's possession. There is something in that contrast that resists easy description. A wedding reduced by scandal and pandemic to something barely visible, made luminous by two items borrowed from the most beloved woman in the family. And then there is this detail, quietly devastating in what it communicates. Prince Andrew walked his daughter down the aisle. He was present for that private moment. But when the official wedding portraits were released, he was absent from every single one. His presence acknowledged in private, his image erased from the public record. That single fact says more about the weight Beatrice carries, the impossible balancing act she performs between love for her father and the reality of what has become, than any interview or official statement ever could.